The sun was sinking low over the Indian Ocean when two ships met by chance. One, a sleek Australian warship bristling with guns and confidence. The other, a slow, weathered freighter flying the flag of a friendly nation. For a few tense minutes, they closed the distance, wave after wave bringing them nearer, until there was no turning back. Then, without warning, the quiet sea exploded into fire, steel, and death. 30 minutes later, both ships were gone. One would leave behind survivors and a story. The other, nothing but wreckage, drifting on the tide. What happened in those final moments? Why did no one from Australia's most powerful cruiser live to tell the tale? This is the mystery of HMAS Sydney and the German raider Kormoran. A battle where questions outnumber answers, and the truth lies 2 kilometers beneath the waves. Before we talk about ships involved in this tragedy, I invite you to subscribe this channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our Australian disaster documentaries. HMAS Sydney, one of 3 modified Leander-class light cruisers in the Royal Australian Navy, wasn't just a ship, she was a symbol. Originally built for the Royal Navy, she was purchased in 1935 to replace the aging HMAS Brisbane. At 171 meters long and over 9,000 tons, she carried the kind of firepower that could turn the tide of a battle. 8 6-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, supported by anti-aircraft guns, machine guns, and torpedo tubes. She even carried her own spotter aircraft, a single Supermarine Walrus, launched from her deck to scout the seas ahead. Kormoran began life not as a warship, but as a merchant vessel. The Steiermark, built for carrying cargo, not waging war. But in the 1930s, as the Treaty of Versailles left Germany's navy outgunned by its rivals, the Kriegsmarine turned to an old tactic with a new face: commerce raiding. Ordinary-looking ships, secretly rebuilt to fight, would roam the oceans disguised as harmless traders, until it was too late for their prey to escape. Steiermark was chosen for this role and given a new name, Kormoran. At 157 meters and over 8,700 tons, she was the largest and newest of Germany's 9 auxiliary cruisers. Outwardly, she could be any number of Allied or neutral ships. In reality, she carried 6 hidden 5.9-inch guns, torpedo tubes, anti-aircraft weapons, and hundreds of sea mines. Every weapon was concealed behind false hull plates and collapsible structures, ready to spring open in seconds when the order came to drop the disguise. On the afternoon of November 19, 1941, Kormoran was about 150 nautical miles southwest of Carnarvon, Western Australia, sailing north at 11 knots. Just before 4 p.m., the crew spotted something on the horizon. At first, it looked like the sail of a tall ship, but it was soon clear. It was the mast of a warship. HMAS Sydney. Captain Theodore Detmers quickly ordered a turn into the sun, hoping to make it harder for Sydney's crew to see them clearly. Kormoran increased speed, but a problem with one of her engines slowed her from 15 knots to 14. Inside, the crew went to action stations, readying their hidden guns and torpedoes, but from the outside, the ship still looked like an ordinary merchant vessel. Sydney had also seen Kormoran. She turned to intercept at high speed, signaling with a lamp, NNJ, meaning make your signal letters. The Germans didn't know this rare code and didn't reply. For 30 minutes, the 2 ships kept getting closer. Sydney tried again, this time with the more common signal, VH, also meaning show your identification. She also sent the request in plain language by lamp. At last, Kormoran responded, raising the call sign PKQI, belonging to the Dutch ship Straat Malacca, and hoisting a Dutch flag. But from Sydney's position, part of the signal was hidden behind Kormoran's funnel. Whether this was an accident or a trick to bring Sydney closer, no one knows. Sydney ordered the signal to be made clear. Kormoran's crew complied, swinging it into full view. By now, the range had dropped to just 8,000 meters. The faulty engine was fixed, but Detmers kept it in reserve. As the gap between the 2 ships narrowed, Sydney called out by signal lamp, "We're bound." Kormoran answered, Batavia. Some German survivors later claimed Sydney asked two more questions: her port of origin and her cargo. They said the answers given were Fremantle and peace goods. At 5 p.m., Captain Detmers quietly ordered his wireless operators to send a false distress call, pretending that Strat Malacca was being chased by a suspicious ship. The signal sent twice included the ship's name, exact position, and the special code for a merchant ship under attack by a raider. This was meant to fool Allied stations and also secretly tell the German Navy that Kormoran, really the raider, was about to be lost. Parts of the signal were picked up by a tugboat and a shore station at Geraldton, but neither could make full sense of it. The messages were simply logged and forgotten for days. Meanwhile, Sydney moved in alongside Kormoran, just 1,300 meters away, on a parallel course. Her big 6-inch guns and a port torpedo launcher were aimed at the raider, and her Walrus scout plane sat ready on its catapult. But Kormoran's crew noticed something odd. Sydney's smaller 4-inch guns were unmanned, and sailors were still casually standing on the upper deck. At one point, Sydney sent the short code IK. The Germans ignored it. It didn't make sense to them. What they didn't realize was that these letters were part of a secret Allied recognition code for the real Strat Malacca. To prove she was genuine, the ship would have needed to reply with the rest of the code. By 5:25 p.m., the Walrus aircraft was shut down and stowed away. At such close range, launching it would have been impossible. 5 minutes later, Sydney sent a final signal. Show your secret sign. The moment of truth had arrived. In answer to Sydney's demand for the secret sign, Detmers gave the order. Drop the disguise. The Dutch flag came down. The German war flag went up. Guns and torpedo tubes swung into position. Almost at the same moment, both ships opened fire. Sydney's first full 8-gun salvo roared out, most shells passing over Kormoran, though some tore through her funnel and wireless room without exploding. Some believe this might have been a warning shot or an attempt to take out the bridge for capture. Kormoran's opening salvo was just 2 shells, her other guns still shedding their disguise, aimed at Sydney's bridge, but they missed. At the same time, 2 torpedoes streaked toward the cruiser, while smaller anti-aircraft and defense guns raked Sydney's side, keeping her from using her own secondary weapons. Then, the German gunnery found its mark. The second salvo smashed Sydney's bridge and crippled her command systems. Soon, all 4 of Kormoran's main guns were firing. Within minutes, Sydney's forward A and B turrets were wrecked before they could fire again. Another hit at the waterline tore into the forward engine room, while a high shot blew the Walrus aircraft to pieces. Kormoran kept aiming for Sydney's waterline and upper decks. After the 6th German salvo, Sydney's aft guns finally replied. U turret fired a few ineffective rounds, but X turret landed solid hits, damaging Kormoran's machinery, wounding a gun crew, and starting a fire in one of her oil tanks. Around the 8th or 9th German salvo, one of Kormoran's torpedoes struck Sydney just in front of A turret, hitting the ship's weakest point. The blast tore a huge hole in her side and caused the bow to dip. Sydney then made a sharp turn to port. German sailors thought she was trying to ram them, but she passed behind Kormoran instead. The next German shells smashed the roof off B turret and destroyed A turret completely. By 5:35 p.m., Sydney was heading south, slowing down and trailing thick smoke. Her main guns were all out of action. Forward turrets destroyed, aft turrets jammed, and her smaller guns were useless at that range. Kormoran kept firing with her rear guns as Sydney crossed behind her, scoring more hits. At about 5:45 p.m., Sydney launched 2 torpedoes, but Kormoran had already turned, and they missed. The turn, however, left Kormoran's engines crippled, and she was now dead in the water. Even so, Kormoran's crew kept up a heavy rate of fire, possibly over 450 shells, before finally stopping around 5:50 p.m. A final torpedo at 6 p.m. also missed Sydney, which was now limping south at low speed. By the end of the 30-minute fight, both ships were badly damaged and burning. Sydney was heading southeast, but seemed out of control. The Germans soon lost sight of her, though the glow from her fires lit the horizon until late at night. Sydney stayed afloat for up to 4 hours, moving slowly, before her bow broke off and she sank. Kormoran was dead in the water. At 6:25 p.m., Captain Detmers ordered the crew to abandon ship. Damage had knocked out the fire pumps, and the growing oil fire threatened the ammunition and mines. By 9 p.m., all boats and rafts were launched. A small crew stayed behind to prepare the ship for scuttling. At midnight, the last men left. Kormoran sank slowly until a huge explosion from the mine hold tore her apart. Survivors were spread across 5 boats and 2 rafts. One raft carrying 60, mostly wounded, sank suddenly, drowning all but 3. In total, the Germans lost 82 men, including 6 officers, 75 sailors, and 1 Chinese crewman. When HMAS Sydney failed to arrive on time, there was little concern at first. Perhaps her escort mission had taken longer. Perhaps she'd stopped to assist another ship. Or maybe she had minor engine trouble. Back then, warships were expected to maintain strict radio silence unless it was absolutely necessary. None of these possibilities were enough to break that silence. But when Sydney still hadn't arrived by November 23rd, alarm bells began to ring. Naval radio stations across Australia began calling her, ordering the cruiser to report in. At dawn that same day, the troopship RMS Aquitania spotted something unusual. A life raft, far from land, carrying 26 German sailors. They were survivors from the Kormoran. Fearing that the German raider might still be nearby, Aquitania kept moving and didn't break radio silence until days later. Meanwhile, 6 Royal Australian Air Force Lockheed Hudsons began sweeping the seas from above, searching for Sydney. Then, news. The British tanker Trocus had rescued another group of Germans from a raft. They claimed their ship, the Kormoran, had fought a battle with an unidentified warship. For the Australian Naval Board, the implication was chilling. That unidentified ship could only be Sydney. After HMAS Sydney vanished from the airwaves, the Navy hoped it was just battle damage keeping her quiet. Orders went out to merchant ships in the area, Pan-Europe, Saija, Herstein, Sunetta, Centaur, and Hermione, to pass through the suspected battle site and watch for any sign of life or wreckage. 4 Royal Australian Navy support ships, HMAS Yandra, Heros, Olive Cam, and Wairala, left Fremantle to join the hunt. In the skies, squadrons of RAAF aircraft and Catalina flying boats scoured the ocean. By 25th November, the first sightings came in, not of Sydney, but of German lifeboats. One came ashore at 17 Mile Well, another near Red Bluff, and more were drifting further out. The men from Kormoran made no attempt to resist when rounded up on land. That evening, the passenger ship Kulinda found a lifeboat with 31 Germans adrift at sea. Hours later, the Australian freighter Centaur stumbled upon Detmer's own boat, overloaded with 62 men. Some were wounded. The overloaded craft began taking on water, forcing Centaur's crew to pass down extra lifeboats before towing them towards safety. Over the next 2 days, more German survivors were recovered, some from open boats, others from life rafts. By the end, 318 of Kormoran's crew were alive. For Sydney, there was nothing. No survivors, no bodies, just a few grim traces, a single lifebelt, a damaged Carly float, and months later, another float washed ashore, with the remains of a young sailor, able seaman Thomas Welsby Clark. The official search ended on the 29th of November. The fate of Sydney and her 645 crew was now a haunting mystery. On the 26th of November, the Navy quietly sent lists of Sydney's crew to every naval district office. Telegrams began arriving at family homes, each carrying the same chilling words, "Missing as a result of enemy action." But the public was told nothing. Naval censors ordered the media to stay silent. Even so, rumors spread fast. Families feared the worst, and with no official word, the uncertainty was unbearable. Finally, on the 30th of November, Prime Minister John Curtin broke the silence. He confirmed the loss of Sydney. Newspapers were allowed to print his statement. but radio stations were told to wait 2 days before broadcasting the news, so other German ships in the area wouldn't be tipped off. A few Melbourne stations ignored the order and were briefly taken off the air. 3 days later, Curtin spoke again, giving the first details of the battle. The news was devastating. Sydney's destruction meant 645 lives lost, the largest loss in Royal Australian Navy history. One ship, gone. And in that single day, over a third of all RAN deaths in the entire war. The blow was made worse when just 1 day later, the Navy announced the sinking of HMAS Parramatta by a German U-boat. Yet beyond Australia, the battle barely made headlines. In the same fortnight, the Royal Navy lost the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal and the battleship HMS Barham, disasters that overshadowed Sydney's fate. And within days, the world's attention shifted to Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor and Singapore. Still, Sydney was the largest Allied ship lost with all hands in the entire war. In Germany, the first reports came from radio intercepts during the search for survivors. By early 1943, an internal account of the battle was compiled for senior officials and later confirmed by a Kormoran sailor sent home in a prisoner exchange. It wasn't until December 1943 that the full story appeared in the German press. On 26 November 1941, urgent telegrams went out to families across Australia. Missing as a result of enemy action. No details, just fear. The media was told to stay silent, but rumors spread quickly. 4 days later, Prime Minister John Curtin confirmed the worst. HMAS Sydney was gone, and all 645 crew were lost. It was the deadliest disaster in Australian naval history, coming just 1 day before the sinking of HMAS Parramatta. Overseas, the loss barely made headlines, overshadowed by other wartime events, and soon forgotten amid the shock of Pearl Harbor. In Germany, however, the story was pieced together from intercepted messages and later confirmed by a returning Kormoran sailor. For Australia, the grief was raw, and the questions were only beginning. By early 1942, the German survivors were moved from Fremantle to prisoner of war camps in Victoria. The sailors went by train to camp number 13 at Murchison, already home to hundreds of Afrika Korps troops, while the officers were taken to the nearby Durangile homestead. Intelligence officers tried everything to extract more details, planting listening devices, sending in undercover agents, but nothing new emerged. Life in captivity was uneventful until January 1945, when Detmers and 19 other Axis officers staged a daring escape through a tunnel they had spent 7 months digging. They were all recaptured within days. When Detmers was caught, he was found carrying a German-English dictionary with 2 coded accounts of the battle, but these revealed little. After the war, on 21 February 1947, the prisoners were finally sent home aboard the steamer Orontes. By coincidence, docked at the opposite pier was the real Strat Malacca, the ship Kormoran had pretended to be. Despite knowing the Kormoran's rough position, the search area for both ships was too vast, and disputes over whether the battle occurred in the German-reported northern position or a southern position near the Abrolhos Islands caused further delays. From 1974 to 1997, several limited searches by the Navy and RAAF found nothing, as they could only cover the continental shelf. A 1990 plan involving the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution collapsed when the search area couldn't be narrowed. A 2001 seminar again failed to agree on a location, and searches in 2002 and 2007 of the southern area produced no results, effectively ruling out that theory. And so, after nearly 67 years of mystery, the final resting places of HMAS, Sydney and Kormoran were revealed, silent witnesses to a battle that claimed 645 Australian lives and left only questions in its wake. Was Sydney simply outmaneuvered by a disguised raider? Or were there mistakes in command and tactics that sealed her fate? Could this tragedy have been avoided? Or was it inevitable in the chaos of war? Let us know your